bias. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 8th April 2024. So let's begin with the list of articles that we have. These are the four articles that we are going to discuss in detail, out of which three articles are related to some or the other, which is based on GST reforms. And then after that, for prelims, we have two articles that we are going to discuss, one on semiconductor chips and then one on AUKUS, and we'll discuss about these with regards to your prelims. And then there are these two headlines or revisited headlines that we have in today's newspaper. So let's begin with the first article that we have, and this first article is on the editorial page, that is page number 6, Shaping India's Path to Inclusive Healthcare. Now let's try to understand what exactly are we talking about. Now why today you'll see that if you go to the newspaper, you'll find that there are 5 articles in total in the editorial pages which are related to 3 are more important from your examination perspective. So that's why these are the 3 that we have picked for your analysis. Now this is because you have the World Health Day on April 7th, and that's why all these 3 articles have been published today. So first is about shaping India's path to inclusive healthcare. Now what exactly, overall when it comes to health, World Health Day has been celebrated on the 7th of April, and this is something that happens annually, and this is where we try to emphasize on the health equity, which is very important for global health and justice. Now in this regard, the World Health Organization has been, we ensure that health becomes a fundamental human right, and that's why this year's theme that they have taken is My Health, My Right. Now this is something that highlights, in a manner you can say, the health that becomes a fundamental, which should become a fundamental right for people. Now that's why this day brings to the light the stark disparities that we have in healthcare access, which has also been increased by the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the environmental challenges that we also have. Some of the most important, that's why when it comes to the problems, you would say that COVID-19 pandemic has been one of the issues that has widened the gap in healthcare access. Similarly, there are environmental crises that we see because of climate change, the kind of changes that we are seeing globally, and then also the widening of socio-economic gaps. So these have been most important factors that has led to widening of the socio-economic, or in general you can say healthcare access divides. Now despite the fact that the health is something that is recognized as a constitutional right over more than 140 countries worldwide, a very significant proportion of the world population still lacks access to essential health services. So for example, this is something that also tells us about the importance of health equity for social justice and legislative reforms as well. Now, when we talk about this term health equity is something that tries to ensure equal opportunities for everyone to attain their best of the health possible, and also trying to acknowledge all the different factors, the socio-economic factors, the environmental factors, everything that can impact the health outcomes. And that's why this is something that also tries to address the root cause of the health inequalities as well. At the same time, for example, poverty or discrimination, lack of access to education or nutrition, clean water, air, housing facilities, all these things, they are a very important factor which lead to disparities in the healthcare access. And at the same time, we have seen that the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change also have led to a lot of disparities increasing worldwide. So that's why we have seen that, especially when it comes to the vulnerable population, they are the ones which are disproportionately affected. So that's why there are all these factors that we need to understand from the perspective. So that's why we need to address poverty, discrimination, access to education, nutrition, clean water, housing. All these things become very crucial in ensuring the equity in health. So that's why when we talk about health equity in this context, we need to understand all these issues that are leading to the problems. And most importantly, we have to understand that the vulnerable populations are actually affected a lot more, right? So that's why remember this point, that the vulnerable populations are affected disproportionately. Vulnerable populations are affected disproportionately. So that's why we see that for them it becomes a major challenge. Now, if we talk about India, when it comes to India, the challenge of health equity is something that is mostly also because of the socio-economic disparities that we have in India. And despite all the improvements that we have, we significantly see that there are gaps in the healthcare access, and that's why in the outcomes of the healthcare also there are problems that persist, especially when you take the rural areas and the urban slums. These are the areas where the issues are even far worse. So, for example, the problems of overcrowding, poor sanitation, and also limited clean water and clean water access are some things that also heighten the healthcare risk that we have in this particular in these kind of areas. At the same time, we also see that there are gender and caste disparities also, which have contributed to health inequalities in India. At the same time, when we talk about India, we see that there are other problems as well. We see that the child mortality rates and immunization rates, mostly among the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes, have been seen to be worse than other categories. So that's why we need to understand that there are all these issues. Similarly, when we talk about the gender disparities, we have seen that the anemia rates have been seen to be higher in women, and especially when it comes to women coming from the poorer sections of the society. So that's why we need to understand that in this particular scenario, when it comes to India, we see that there are wide socio-economic gaps that also lead to significant health disparities, especially between urban and the rural areas and among different social and economic groups. So that's why in this context we need to understand that there are all these problems that we need to address if we need to understand the issues. So that's why here we have to understand that there are gender and caste disparities as well. So that's why when it comes to, let's say, one or the other access rates, so for example, let's say when we talk about the caste related disparities, what we have seen is that higher child mortality rates have been seen, and lower immunization. So that's why we see that there are these issues when it comes to the caste based problems, and at the same time, if we understand the issues related to gender, we know that anemia related issues are more in women, and especially women coming from lower or poorer sections of the society. So that's why we see that there are all these issues, especially when we look at India. Then at the same time, when it comes to the non-communicable diseases, we see that they also represent a major health burden, and at the same time we see that equitable access to treatment and preventive health care have been very critical issues in this particular scenario. And when it comes to also the doctors, we see that there is a critical shortage of doctors, especially in the rural areas. And this is something that further hinders the healthcare access despite all the initiatives that have been taken. For example, when you look at something like Ayushman Bharat or National Health Mission, these are the things, these are some of the missions or schemes that have tried to aim at improving the coverage and reducing the disparities altogether. And that's why we see that the data shows that we have been able to improve upon certain issues like this, but still there is a long way to go in this particular scenario. And that's why achieving health equity in India, it requires a multifaceted approach that includes improving the healthcare infrastructure, addressing the socio-economic determinants of the health, and at the same time trying to understand that how governments, the civil society, the healthcare providers, and all the communities can come together in ensuring health equity in India. And that's why enhancing health literacy, promoting the preventive education, and at the same time leveraging the strength of the non-governmental organizations becomes also very very important. Where we see that there are all these critical steps that can be taken. So that's why. So we have seen that programs like Ayushman Bharat and National Health Mission, they have tried to aim at improving the healthcare access and reduce the disparity. And then at the same time, we see that when it comes to the importance, we need to address the socio-economic determinants and ensure that government, the civil society, and the healthcare providers and various communities, they can come together to ensure health equity in India. And at the same time, the use of international organizations and the digital health innovations also can become very very crucial in making sure that we can enhance the healthcare accessibility and the effectiveness altogether. So that's why there are all these things that can be done, and these kind of things, especially from the perspective of even the local organizations and the communities, also become very very crucial in ensuring health equity. That we need to do and ensure that healthcare access is something that is available to everyone. It is available to everyone, and uh, we do not have any kind of disparity between whom the health access is going to and who doesn't have the access. Let's look at the second article, and this is also on the editorial page, page number 6. Gone too soon, the India. Now, this also you can relate to GS2 in health or maybe also GS1 in social issues. Now, in this particular scenario, it talks about the subject of youth suicides. Now, overall, when you look at the problem of youth suicides, you'll see that when it comes to suicides in India is a very significant and tragic issue altogether. And at the same time, when we talk about India, we see that we have been reporting the highest number of suicides globally in some of the cases, according to one of the data that we had seen according to National Crime Records Bureau, where it had seen that there were 1.7 lakh 1.71 lakh cases in 2022 alone. So that's why we need to understand that this has started becoming a big problem for India. So that's why it reports that these many number of cases have been there, and suicide rates have increased to 12.4 per 1 lakh, which is highest ever rates that have been recorded in India. So that's why these are some of the data that have been published here. So suicide rates in India have reached a record high of 12.4 per 1 lakh people. Or although even in this particular scenario, these numbers actually could be underestimated numbers because of various different factors. So we have seen that due to stigma, due to inadequate reporting systems, we see that the numbers actually are can actually be much higher than the numbers that have been officially reported. And at the same time, it also says that alarmingly, almost 41% of the suicides in India, they involve individuals who are under the age of 30 years. And that's why this makes suicide as one of the leading causes of death among the young. All these things have been covered in this article. These are the things that these articles, this article has highlighted. Now, in this regard, so that's why these are some of the data that have been published. Now, overall, when it comes to the problem of suicides, we understand that the causes of suicides are multifaceted, and at the same time they range from biological issues to psychological issues to familial issues to socio-cultural factors. So there are a lot of different factors. At the same time, mental health issues, family problems, academic stress, social pressures, economic distress, all these things actually, when we look at the key risk factors in India, we see that mental health problems, family issues, academic stress, social pressure, economic distress, and even substance abuse. This is also, these are some of the key risk factors when it comes to India. Now, overall, adding to this, what we see is that this situation gets further complicated. When we look at some of the other areas, for example, the high expectations and competitive examinations and failures in some of the academic, in their academic life, is something that becomes one of the major causes as well. And when it comes to women, in case of women, we have seen that there are multiple factors. For example, early marriages and early and arranged, and also very rigid gender roles also have been seen to some of the issues. So that's why we see that all these are the major problems when it comes to the suicide rates being high. Now, overall, when it comes to suicides, we need to first understand what are the problems, where are the problems. First, mental health problems. Issues like depression, anxiety, and some of the other psychiatric conditions, they play a very significant role, with mental health challenges being one of the major risk factors when it comes to suicides. So that's why the first problem that we need to understand is from the perspective of mental health. So mental health becomes a major challenge, and in this particular regard, we see that problems like mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and some of the other psychiatric conditions, they can lead to these kind of conditions. So depression has been seen as one of the major problems here. Then at the same time, we see that family issues, as suggested here, also leads to a lot of problems. So there have been negative or traumatic experiences with the family, including domestic violence or parental pressure, or sometimes intergenerational conflicts also have actually contributed to the stress that has been experienced by a lot of people who are young, and that also has led to these numbers increasing. So that's why family issues becomes one of the major factors here. Perform, the pressure to perform academically, the fear of examination failure, and the high expectations, not only from the parents, not only from the educational institutions, but also self-inflicted expectations that we see in a lot of students, that also has contributed to a considerable number of suicides among the students. And that's why this is also some one of the major factors that needs to be addressed, the academic stress. Then at the same, so for example, we see that challenges related to the even social media use, or maybe cyberbullying, and also the struggle to fit in with the peers, which can also increase the feelings of isolation and despair among a lot of people who are young. So that's why we see that there are all these factors as well. So that's why we see that social media, cyberbullying, and then also the struggle to fit in with peers. We see that even these kind of things actually have led to the feelings of isolation and despair in a lot of people who are young, and that also contributes to these kind of issues increasing. Then there are economic distresses as well. Financial problems and concerns about future employment prospects can also lead to hopelessness and the despair, and particularly in the highly competitive job market that we right now have in India. And just look at the numbers, look at the number of vacancies that we have in a lot of these competitions versus the number of people who are preparing or the people who have applied for them. So if you look at the data is staggering, and that's why this also becomes a lot of it creates a lot of problem in people. The worry about employment, the worry about the finances, the future, all these things, they actually lead to a lot of these problems increasing. Then at the same time, substance abuse. We have seen that when it comes to substance abuse, the use of alcohol and drugs has is known to have increased the risk of suicidal behavior by impairing the judgment and also increasing the mental health issues altogether. So that's why substance abuse becomes one of the challenges that also contributes to these kind of factors. Then at the same time, we see that there are a lot of socio-cultural pressures as well. The discrimination on the basis of gender, on the basis of sexual orientation, on the basis of caste, as well as the pressure of conforming to societal expectations. All these things can also significantly impact the mental health and contribute to societal risks as well. So that's why we see that there are contributing factors where we also have socio-economic, or you can say in a manner socio-cultural pressure. Socio-cultural pressure, where we are talking about the disparities related to gender, disparities related to caste, disparities, or you can say in a manner the discrimination related to sexual orientation. All these things can also lead to a lot of issues here. So that's why we see that there are these factors. At the same time, there are factors related to relationships as well. That issues in personal relationships, including the romantic relationships, can also lead to emotional distress that may also contribute to suicides in a lot of cases. So that's why we see that even relationships, they also become contributing factors. So that's why there are all these contributing factors that are leading to these kind of issues. Now, when we look at what can be done, what are the ways in which we can try and solve these issues? First, to enhance the mental health services, to increase the accessibility of mental health services, to improve the access to mental health services across urban and rural areas, that can help. At the same time, also increasing the number of trained mental health professionals and also integrate the mental health care into the primary health care services as well. So all these things can also be of very very important from the perspective of prevention of these cases. So let me take an extra slide here and show you. So if we are looking at some of the issues, so for let's say, some of the ways in which we can solve some of these issues. So first could be to enhance the accessibility, all right, to enhance or increase the mental health services. So enhance mental health services. So this becomes very crucial to increase the accessibility, to improve the access to the mental health care services, and also have a lot of trained professional. So first is about accessibility. First is about accessibility, and secondly, it's about trained professionals. So these things can really help in reducing this particular scenario, and also to try and reduce the stigma, to launch public awareness campaigns to destigmatize mental health issues, and also try to encourage the behavior of seeking help whenever required. So that's why, to the stigma reduce the stigma which is often associated with mental health issues. Then at the same time, we also need to strengthen the family support system as well. There are programs that are required to even educate the parents on recognizing the mental health issues and fostering open communication with their children. So that's where parental education becomes important. At the same time, family counseling can become important. Providing access to the family counseling services to address the domestic issues and improve the family dynamics also can help a lot in these kind of issues. So that's why, to strengthen when it comes to strengthening of the family support systems, of family support, strengthening of family support. And in this particular regard, basically you can say that in a manner, parental education, parental education, and at the same time, family counseling. Family counseling, these kind of things can actually help a lot. Then after that, education, because academic issues are also a big challenge here. So that's why reforming the educational systems become very very important, that we can maybe incorporate life skills, stress management, emotional well-being also into the curriculum. At the same time, reforms in examination, implementing an alternative assessment method so that it can reduce the pressure and focus on holistic development of the students as well. So that's why in this case you can say that educational reforms can also be very very crucial. So that's why even counseling services can be provided in schools. We can establish in school counseling services for the students to access the emotional and psychological support that many a times they might need. Then also the economic and the social support measures that can be taken. Maybe having a targeted financial support to the economically distressed families, and also employment opportunities, to create employment opportunities and through skill development programs also for people who are young. So that's why all these things can also matter a lot, and that's why it becomes very very crucial that we can take economic and social support measures. Economic and social support measures can be taken so that financial assistance may be to the distressed families, employment opportunities, skill development, and also programs for inclusivity to support the marginalized communities, to reduce the discrimination and the impact that it has on their mental health. And maybe an online support, that we can develop an online platform for mental health support, which can also include helplines or chat supports or resources, something like a telemanas that the government of India has. So something like telemanas can really help a lot. Then at the same time, we can have suicide prevention strategies as well, and this is where we see that there are certain things that are being done by the government of India also, where they are trying to have helpline numbers that can also help in a lot of ways. So that's why we see that there are all these things. And at the same time, one thing that is often neglected is also the physical health, and lifestyle. Because we have seen that the current lifestyle also has been a major problem, the lack of physical activities. We have to encourage regular physical activities and sports as a means of improving mental health as well. And at the same time, we can promote practices like yoga and meditation for stress reduction and also emotional well-being of the people. So that's why there are all these things that can be done in ensuring that we can actually move towards a scenario where we can decrease the rates and we can ensure that we can help people who need help, who need to seek help, and it goes both ways, from the side of the people who are feeling this pressure or who are in this stress, at the same time the recognition from the people on the other side, people who are living around them, maybe the parents, maybe the friends and family. The government also has to play a role. So there are all these things, and everyone included, the entire community included, only will be able to decrease these kind of issues that of we have seen that in numbers have been increasing in India. Let's look at the next article, and this is implementing universal health coverage. Now, when we say universal health coverage, what is the meaning of universal health coverage? First of all, let's try to understand that universal health coverage is basically a global health initiative that aims to ensure that all individuals and communities, they have access to health services that they need without having to suffer financial hardships as a result of paying for them. Now, this is something that becomes very, very crucial, because this has been mentioned by the WHO, and the WHO has been emphasizing on implementation of this and has been asking people to implement this. So that's why this basically refers to the global goal of providing all people with the healthcare that they need without creating undue financial burden on the individual. Now, this is basically, you can say, also in line with the sustainable development goals, and where we have seen that about health and how there should be an access to universal health coverage altogether. So that's why when it comes to universal health coverage, this includes a wide range of services, from health promotion and disease prevention to treatment, rehabilitation, providing different types of care, having basically the entire spectrum of the essential health services that are required. Now, when it comes to how exactly it works, we see that some of the most important principles, the core principles of universal health access becomes first equity to the access, something that we also discussed in the first article as well. To provide equity, equity to, or rather in access, equity in access, correct? So everyone who needs health care services should be able to get them, and not only the people who have the money to pay for it, right? Even for the people who don't have the money to pay for it, they should also have access to healthcare. Then the quality of services, that also matters. Now, in case of, when it comes to quality of services, we need to understand very high quality to improve the health of those who are receiving them, and at the same time paying for the financial, or rather the health services, should not put people at risk of financial harm altogether. So that's why financial protection. So these become very, very crucial parts of any universal healthcare or universal health coverage. Now, overall, when it comes to universal health coverage, what we understand is that we are trying to ensure that everyone has access to comprehensive health services, and this is something that specifically, according to goal 3, as a part of sustainable development goal 3, it becomes very, very crucial aspect of it. And that's why achieving universal health access or health coverage, the well-being and the health security of all the citizens of the country. And that's why it becomes very, very crucial for it to, and for every government to understand its role in ensuring that they can provide whatever needs to be provided. Now, overall, when it comes to the universal health coverage, the foundation lies in the principle of equity, ensuring that health services are delivered efficiently, and it is rooted in within the communities, with very particular focus on strengthening the primary healthcare systems as well, to address all the health needs in a very integrated approach altogether. So in December 2012, we saw that the United Nations General Assembly, they unanimously had passed a resolution to encourage nations to progress towards a universal health coverage. And in India, this commitment was also reflected in a very high, there was a high level expert group that was set up, and this was as a part of in 2011, and this also had proposed to increase the public health finance to 2.5% of India's GDP by the 12th 5-year plan between 2012 to 17. So spending 2.5% of GDP by 2017. Now, what we see that the National Health Policy of 2017, it had also emphasized the goal of achieving the highest possible health and well-being for level for all the citizens in the country, and alongside universal access to quality healthcare services without the risk of any kind of financial hardships, which also is something that aligns with the universal health coverage that was and it has been aligned with it. Now, in case of when it comes to India, we see that there is a lack of direct constitutional mandate for a basic right to health. In the fundamental rights, right to health is not included. But we see that India's constitutional provisions under the directive principles of state policy, they advocate for health and well-being. There are various articles within the constitution that direct the state to improve the public health and also ensure humane working conditions and enhance the nutritional standards of the population as well. This becomes very, very crucial to understand that in India, in the fundamental rights, this is very, very important, that in the fundamental rights, access to health or healthcare has not been included. But there are other constitutional provisions, directive principles of state policy, and in general the welfare that the government has to ensure for its people. So that includes healthcare. So that's why we see that there are other constitutional provisions, but we see that from time to time there are discussions that shouldn't health also, although we do say that as a part of right to life, these things should be included or these things should be said, but at the same time explicitly it not being mentioned is also something that many of the critics have many a times pointed out. Now, that's why at the same time the local governance bodies also have to play a big role. Municipalities or the panchayats, they also have to play a very, very important role, because for example, uh, if you look at article 243, if you look at article 243, specifically article 243G, it talks about the role of the local government bodies also to implement or strengthen the public health systems. Now, in this particular regard, we have to understand the urgency and the individual rights that people should have to health. Achieving universal health coverage in India, it faces a lot of challenges, particularly first of all because of India's huge migrant population, and at the same time significant urban slum dwelling also becomes a challenge. And these are the things where we see that accessibility to primary healthcare services becomes very crucial. And so that's why one, the vast migrant population and significant slum residency, they become very, very crucial for us to understand, and we need to understand how exactly the actionable rights, that is freedom to, is critical. Cycle of poverty and inequality influenced by the broader aspects like the education and social mobility. Now, in this particular scenario, we talk about certain concepts like freedom from and freedom to. to illustrate the discourse around health as a human right. And this is something that emphasizes on enabling the various aspects of health access as well. So ensuring this right is seen as an essential thing to breaking the cycle of poverty and inequality. It is something that becomes very crucial, because then only this can be done only by providing better opportunities, better education, and better social mobility altogether. Now that's why when it comes to India, there are certain strategies that if we want to realize universal health coverage in India, there are certain key areas that India has to understand and India has to address. So, for example, the healthcare for the urban migrants. So, the healthcare needs of the urban migrants and the informal sector, it becomes very crucial. And then at the same time, we see that there are other things that can be done, that we can simplify the healthcare reimbursements to reduce the out of pocket expenses that the people have. And then at the same time, when it comes to all these things, we need to understand that these steps need or demand a political will, and that's where substantial investment is also required. Strategic planning to establish a very coherent policy pathway also is very important in this case, to ensure that we can provide and empower the political and the social aspects, uh, enhance overall winning in strategies. Needs now, overall, he being a very prominent figure in India's tax reforms, being the chairman of the 13th Finance Commission, he has urged that the next Indian government should try, should also, because right, and then there should be an independent rates that we have. It leads to a lot of GST fraud according to the higher systems, and that he said that should be a uniform. That there can be things like carbon taxes on certain groups, certain goods, so that we are also addressing the problems of pollution and climate change. So that's why he talked about all these things, that there are a lot of areas where we see that there are chances of improvement, and he talked about all these chances of where exactly we can make the improvements. He also advocated for the distribution of the GST revenues, distribution of the GST revenues to the third tier of the government, where he said that there is a need for constitutional amendment to support this kind of a change, quality and democracy at a local level as well. So that's why he talked about the fact that we need to ensure that we can share the GST revenues with the local governments as well, and ensure that everything that is happening locally. So that's why these are some of the things that he has recommended as a part of the GST regime, or improvements or reforms in GST regime. Now let's look at the prelims based articles. The first article is on page number 9, related to science and technology, and this is what is the technology behind manufacturing a semiconductor chip. Now this is where it talks about semiconductors and how semiconductors work, what are the different types of technologies related to semiconductors. So for when it comes to the global semiconductor manufacturing landscape, we today see that semiconductor chip manufacturing has been contributing to a lot of electronic development or areas in. Now, semiconductor chip manufacturing is concentrated only in a few global regions, and we have seen that COVID-19 political tension, they have highlighted the risks of this concentration, and that's why it has prompted many of the countries and companies, including India, to invest in local chip manufacturing infrastructure as well. Now, in India, what we see is that the Tata Group, in participation with Taiwan's Power Chip Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, is setting up a 30 millimeter wafer fabrication plant in Gujarat. Now, producing the first chip by 2026. Additionally, we have seen that two assembly in them, so that they start conducting. Alright, so otherwise you'll see that these semiconductors only under specific conditions they will start to conduct. Alright, they will start to act like a conductor. So for example, let's say solar energy. We talk about solar panels, etc. In solar panels, what do we see? In the solar panels, you have semiconductors, and when sunlight falls on these semiconductors, they start. What happens in this particular case is that you have a semiconductor like this, all right, where the electrons, etc., they are just not arranged in a single direction. But when sunlight falls on it, when sunlight falls on the semiconductor, they all get arranged in a single direction, and hence they will start behaving like a conductor. Now, to enhance this behavior, we have something called as a dopant. We have something called as a dopant. Alright, and so that's why to make the semiconductors more useful, we add tiny amounts of some of the other materials which are called as dopants. And it's a bit like, you can say, adding a pinch of salt to a recipe just to change the flavor. So that's why this dopant will now change how well it can conduct. You can say that these are, you can say, tiny materials, or what we also say that we add. Alright, so you can say that we add tiny amounts of other material, tiny amounts of, let me simplify this, adding a material to semiconductor to increase their conductivity. Alright, so we add this dopant. Now, another term which you will often see with regard to semiconductors is a transistor. So what do we mean by a transistor? This is a typical case of a transistor. The first picture that you see here on your screen, this is, you can say, typically a transistor. Now, think of transistors as tiny switches that can turn electricity on or off. And they are the building blocks of any kind of electronic devices. Whether your smartphones or computers, this is something that allows them to process the information and perform all the tasks. So that's why transistors become very, very crucial. Now, what we see is that for making semiconductors useful, we start making circuits on semiconductors. Alright, we can arrange millions of these tiny switches or transistors on a very small piece of semiconductor to create a very complex circuit. Alright, just imagine like drawing a detailed map on a small piece of paper, because here we are saying that these are very small devices or instruments, you can say. So what happens is that in this semiconductor, all right, we'll take the semiconductors, and in the it will create a very small semiconductor. And now what we see is that to create this circuit, manufacturers, they basically use mask, and these masks, you can say that these are like stencils, and masks and dopants will be used to ensure that these transistors, they can actually work. Now this layer that we have, we will create a layer, and on that we will keep on adding the dopants which are specific in a very specific pattern to create a very complex circuit. What happens is that with the help of these transistors, we will create the circuit. Now millions of detailed Google map of a particular place, that how everything just makes sense. Every road that is displayed on that Google map, it makes sense. It is leading to somewhere, and you can follow the exact path. Similarly, these very tiny.
अरे सभी बताने क्या बात है, ये किसी को बताओ भी, कोर्ट केस, फिर वो यूँ क्या है अगले पता नहीं क्या आपका धांधलीबाजी हुई हो इसमें। नहीं वैसा कोई दिक्कत नहीं, वो तो हो जाएगा, बस वही है दिक्कत, लोग बाबा कहने वाले का मुँह नहीं पकड़ा जाता है। बस 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 यह तो बात है ही नहीं। फिर मैं कहा चलो बाहर में 8। अरे दिक्कत बता, दिक्कत और कुछ नहीं है। अरे दिक्कत वो है भाई, बहुत से आदमी को वो और तुम्हें खुश में पूछते नहीं है। नहीं पूछते क्या रहा क्या रहा क्या रहा। हाँ क्या रहा क्या रहा। मुझे वो आदत पता नहीं है। वो तो बस मानो मैं 1.5 महीना हो, 1.5 महीना हो गया फ़ोन बंद कर रखा हूँ ना यार। वैसे कोई तो दिक्कत नहीं है भाई। ये हो गया बस इतना कि भाई ये कम से कम 2 तो है मेरे हाथ में भाई। इतनी ज़्यादा दिन हो गए वेट कर रहे हैं। और कोई टीचिंग की भी है ये, उसमें जुलाई में होगा काम। टीचिंग वाली में जुलाई में मिलेगा। तो 4-5 महीने लेखपाल में अपना दिख जाए भाई कैसे काम पे है कहीं भी। बस पता नहीं कितने उससे मटियाँ भी चलेगा। 8 अप्रैल होगी, इलेक्शन हो जाएंगे। बस फिर इलेक्शन के बाद तो जुलाई का काम। बस थोड़ा। हाँ उसका भी डॉक्यूमेंटेशन का, उस डॉक्यूमेंटेशन का चल रहा है ना टीचिंग वाली का। उसमें कागज जमा होने थे ना। ना उसमें फाइनल है। फाइनल तो दोनों में है। ज्वाइनिंग की बात हो, उसमें क्या है ना, ज्वाइनिंग पे एकदम सरकार को पैसा बहाने बजा के फिर 2 महीने पीछे हटाती चली जा। अगर बस ये काम तो पूरा, बस फाइल वर्क तो इसकी पूरी होगी थी देखभाल वाली। बस इसमें कोर्ट केस आ गया। अब किसी को बताऊँ तो भाई मैं बताऊँ। हाँ वैसे कोई दिक्कत नहीं हुआ तो बस। हाँ। हम्म। हम्म। ना अरे सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत तो क्या करो। ठीक है सर जो तो ठीक है जो। हेलो। हेलो। हेलो।